What up fellas, Like in the building. Today we are gonna be watching a video from Hamster Wheel, what I like about Wrath of the Lich King. By the way, this is my favorite expansion and I just love Wrath of the Lich King. I love the PvE aspect, I love the PvP aspect. The PvP is amazing, guys. When I compare it, I'm sorry, I know that there is going to be a lot of butthurt people, but the vanilla PvP is kind of like casual game, like the ceiling is not really that high, you know what I'm saying? But in Wrath of the Lich King, guys, it's everything about skill, and it's also super fast. Like, whenever I'm playing 3 vs 3 on my Holy Paladin, whenever I play 3 vs 3 with my Disco Priest, it's really literally just one global is going to be a mistake and it's going to cost your life. So let's have a look.
Hey guys, Hamster Wheel here with a new video, and today I'd like to talk to you about what I like about Wrath of the Lich King. I made a video about what I like about Vanilla WoW and the Burning Crusade, so I thought it would be fitting to follow that trend and talk about this expansion too. And hey,
Wrath of the Lich King, the best expansion ever. I'm sorry, I know there's gonna be a lot of haters, but I just said it. Somebody need to be saying how it is, you know. Stop hating. You can be writing me in the comments. I don't care. DBC is also decent, don't get me wrong, and vanilla, that's where all it begins. So it's just the evolution, and then it went kind of downhill, you know what I'm saying.
Who knows, I might do one for Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria in the near future as well. For now though, let's talk about the Wrath of the Lich King era. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of this expansion, as my number 1 is the Burning Crusade, and number 2 is Vanilla. And number 3 is probably Wrath of the Lich King. So, definitely...
Yeah, that's actually pretty decent ranking. Like, DBC is just the classic, bro. The Black Temple, Sunwell Plateau, the fucking Naja lady. Like, I'm not blaming you, Hamsterwell. This is actually a pretty good, you know, selection.
Not my favorite, but there are absolutely some features in this expansion that I did like a lot. Oh, and just as a disclaimer, just because I like these features doesn't mean I want them in Classic or anything like that, just so I can rule that out. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about what I like about the Wrath of the Lich King. So the first thing I want to talk about is spell power. In the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, Blizzard decided to no longer differentiate between spell damage and spell healing. Whereas before, you had items with damage and healing, or items with just healing on them in vanilla, and items with damage and healing, or healing items with a third of that healing being damage in a later patch in the Burning Crusade. And in the Burning Crusade, they decided to do that, so at least with full healing gear, you'll be able to do some damage with your current spec and main gear. In Wrath of the Lich King, however, they decided to get rid of that concept and just have one source of spell damage and healing, called spell power. So whether you were a healer or a damage dealer, it didn't matter. All caster gear had spell power, which, as someone who used to play a healer a lot in Retail Vanilla and a fair bit on private servers, I thought was a really nice change.
Just to summarize this, there is still a difference between a healer gear and a spell damage gear. Let's say for example that I'm playing my shaman in Wrath of the Lich King, and I'm going to Ice Crown Citadel. Right now I'm about 5.8k gear score, but in a nutshell, I have my gear, and I have some pieces that are with mana regeneration, and I have also some pieces that are with spell critical and spell haste. And at the same time, I can be actually easily swapping with my dual spec between resto talents and with my elemental talents, and I can be also a DPS, and I can be also a healer with the same gear, because both of them are giving me the spell power. The only difference is that you are supposed to have the resto gear because you are going to be getting more MP5 mana regeneration, so still you need to get resto gear, but you can be actually doing some okay DPS as well with the resto gear as well. So actually I'm up for this change.
Back in Retail Vanilla, I always struggled to find both good healing gear and find a damage set alongside my healing gear for when I'm out in the world doing solo stuff. So I did like the fact that in Wrath of the Lich King they had spell power, and healing items were obviously not as good as damage items, since healing items usually had more MP5, more spirit, and damage items had things like spell hit and such. But it did mean that you could go from being an elemental shaman to a resto shaman even if you only had elemental gear, which is exactly what I did on Warmane's Wrath of the Lich King private server, where I did dungeons as a restoration shaman but with nothing but elemental gear. as I didn't really have anything else. And
that's a perfect solution for this problem. Whenever, for example, you are a druid and you want to be a balanced druid, like that's really nice. But let's say that, for example, you just started and you want to gear yourself up. At the beginning, you need to be running 5-man dungeons, RDF, random heroic dungeons, and the problem is that you need a spec that is viable, so you're not gonna be having long queue times. For example, you gotta be a tank. Tanks are having instant queues. You don't have to wait anything. With a healer, it's the same thing. You don't have to wait almost any time at all. You don't have any downtime, so you can be just going from a dungeon to dungeon. It doesn't matter that you are having an elemental gear. If you know how to play, you can still actually do pretty good. So Hamster will figure this out, and that's how he geared his shaman. So thumbs up for that one.
And I did just fine, partially because of all my items having spell power, rather than giving me the old system where I would only have damage and healing gear, and thus severely gimping me in the amount of healing I would be able to do.
Exactly.
I thought this was a really cool change, and it was a nice balance between gear being able to fulfill multiple roles, adding that extra layer of flexibility, and there still being some differences in stats that you ideally want to end up with maybe 1 or 2 extra sets of gear. Next up, I want to talk about the more complex rotations. Listen, I was a huge fan of raiding in vanilla and in the Burning Crusade, especially the Burning Crusade, because raiding as a boomkin or elemental shaman while being a solid asset to your group was something that still kinda gets to me to this day. But while that and the raids themselves were fun, the rotation of many classes were admittedly very simple and boring.
Bro, Classic is so hard. Like, this is so hard. I have to be spamming Shadow Ball to the whole day. Like you have no idea how Classic hard is. Bro, you're spamming Shadow Balls? You're spamming just Frostbolt one button? Like, that's insane. That's mental, dude. Like, you're so skilled. Yeah, Wrath of the Lich King. This is the new era, baby. Like, we don't want these crybabies. This game is harder. Like, Wrath of the Lich King, it's hard, bro. Like, if you're gonna kill Lich King 25 heroic, it means that you actually did something. But actually, Naxxramas is also hard. I've been playing also some vanilla on the private servers, and I've been tanking. I've been a main tank, and just to tell you, Naxxramas is kind of tough, and Anchorage is actually also kind of tough. BWL, that's, if people know what to do, there's nothing really to do. And MC, bro, MC is just, you can go like level 58 and do MC. Like, what?
Balanced druids pretty much only use Starfire, Insect Swarm, and maybe Fairy Fire.
Easy.
Fire Mage just spammed fireballs and threw out a Scorch once every 50 seconds or so. Destro Warlocks did nothing but apply a curse, spam Shadow Bolts, and life tap occasionally. And Elemental Shamans, in long fights at least, did nothing but drop totems and spam Lightning Bolt. And this was also one of my main complaints about Elemental Shamans in the Burning Crusade. My old level 70 Tarn Shaman was probably my main character there on that private server, and I did numerous Karazhan and Gruul's Lair raids. And let me tell ya, spamming nothing but Lightning Bolt and maybe sneaking in a Chain Lightning here and there in a boss fight gets boring pretty darn fast. So, when I first played Wrath of the Lich King on a private server, I had much more fun with the rotations of the classes that I played. While Elemental Shaman still had a fairly simple rotation, at least now you have Flame Shock to keep track of.
You put a Flame Shock, then you put your Lava Burst, 100% critical chance, and then if there is AoE needed, you're gonna be putting your Chain Lightning, otherwise just Lightning Bolts. Yeah, it's lit. But still actually, Enhancement Shaman is better DPS in WOTLK than Elemental Shaman. I'm sorry I said it, but it is what it is.
You got Lava Burst, which was awesome. Chain Lightning is now more viable to use. And for AoE you got Thunderstorm and your Fire Nova from your totem. And well, one of the most fun rotations for me at least was the Balanced Druid. Like my old Elemental Shaman, I also had a pretty decked out Druid on that Burning Crusade private server that I raided with multiple times. And while seeing nasty Starfire crits sure was fun, I always thought it was a shame that you barely ever used any other offensive spells. Moonfire was often considered to be too mana expensive for long fights, as well as Wrath. I only ever used Wrath for maybe the Curator in Karazhan, and that's it. So when I discovered that their rotations switch back and forth between Starfire and Wrath, I couldn't be happier. Not to mention that both the lunar eclipse and solar eclipse gave massive buffs to these two spells.
Bro, balance druid in WOTLK is so much fun. Like, last time, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, I was basically just doing Halls of Reflection. It's actually kind of like higher difficulty level dungeon in Wrath of the Lich King, and basically we got one balance druid, and the balance druid was actually kind of like okay geared, like nothing really extra, and we got, for example, like I think one rogue that was like kind of geared, but anyway, we just went this dungeon, and this dude, this balance druid, bro, his DPS is mental, especially with the AoE. He just pops the Starfall and everything is dying. And the Starfall has actually, I think, like 1 minute 20 seconds. If you don't know what Starfall is just he plays a spell, and the stars are killing everything around you for like, I think, like 13 seconds, 14 seconds, something like this. A massive mental AoE damage. It's lit.
I enjoyed it so much that I had a nice little boomy on the old Gamer District private server, as well as this current boomy on Warmane's Wrath Lich King server. And of course there are tons and tons of other rotations that became much more fun and interesting in the Wrath Lich King era, like the Destruction Warlock, the Arcane and Fire Mage, and so on.
Yep.
But I think you get the idea with these two examples. I love the rotations in Wrath, and they were, in my opinion, a big improvement over the previous expansions.
You actually have to try to get
Another
better
thing I gotta
DPS.
talk about are these reputation tabards, which I thought were a really cool idea. You
a
basically
great
equip
idea.
a tabard from a certain faction, and while doing level 80 normal or heroic dungeons, you get bonus reputation from that specific faction. And being able to farm reputation while doing any dungeon you want, as long as it's level 80 normal or heroic, is in my opinion a really cool idea. I mean, if you compare it to the Burning Crusade, you got reputation for a certain faction depending on the dungeon you were doing. The Burning Crusade knew a total of 16 dungeons, which was pretty nice. But if you wanted to farm reputation with the Cenarian Expedition, for instance, because they had an epic you really wanted, well, in terms of dungeons, you were limited to just 3. Same with Thrallmaw reputation. You wanted that killer one-handed caster sword? Well, I can't blame you for wanting it, but it does mean you were also limited to just 3 dungeons. And in Wrath they really improved this by using these tabards and you gaining reputation regardless of whatever dungeon you were doing.
Let's say, for example, that right now I'm going to be farming Ebon Blade reputation on my Holy Paladin. And Holy Paladin / Protection Paladin, I'm also tanking ICC. But basically what I needed to do is that I needed to do a quest chain for the Ebon Blade. I think it's like five quests or something. And after I did these quests, I could actually pick up the tabard, and then I can just go to dungeons, and I can be spamming dungeons, and I'm gonna be exalted within a couple of weeks. And that is actually even faster. It depends how many dungeons you're doing daily, but that's actually really smart, and you can be changing the content. You don't have to be just going to dungeons the whole time like in TBC. In TBC you will realize that a lot of like reputation grind is kind of painful, but you gotta do what you gotta do, you know. You gotta get that gear, and that's how it is basically.
It was also a nice bonus that with these tabards you could switch the reputation you wanted to farm right on the spot.
Yep.
So let's say I wanted to get revered with the Kirin Tor and not any higher, and I get revered about halfway through the dungeon. These tabards then allow me to switch to another faction rather than doing the other half of the dungeon and gaining reputation with a faction that I don't need any more reputation with. So yeah, I thought this was a really cool feature added in the Wrath of the Lich King era. Speaking of dungeons, I gotta talk about those as well. Not really the difficulty, because the difficulty was in my opinion way too low, especially on a server where they already progressed through all the content and everyone is wearing full epic gear and they have 5k plus gear score. I mean, at that point it becomes a complete face roll with next to no challenge. What I mean is the dungeons themselves. I thought many of them had really cool designs and looked amazing. If you played Warcraft 3 before World of Warcraft and you remember having to go to Stratholme and purge it, I guarantee that doing the Culling of Stratholme dungeon in the Wrath of the Lich King era must have been an absolute treat. At least that's what it was for me. Doing the same thing, but now instead of control...
This dungeon was amazing. I remember the first time, guys, the mission from Warcraft 3 when you are cleaning the Stratholme. This is the same thing, and the dungeon from Vanilla Stratholme. This is all before that, and you are going like in the past, and you are actually helping Arthas to clean the civilians, and you are fighting Mal'Ganis. This was a brilliant idea, and I really enjoyed this dungeon a lot. But just to mention his point is that if you got a fully progressed server where they are actually killing Ice Crown 25 heroics, and with this gear, and afterwards they are going to random dungeons and random heroic dungeons. Yeah, obviously the dungeons are gonna be a little bit easy, and I think it is what it is. But that's how, for example, why I really love that Warmane also opened their progressive server Frostmourne. So, but what it basically means is that it's a seasonal server. So you're starting. It's like the phases in classic that you are having right now. So you are starting with the phase one, and the phase one is gonna be only next Rammus. It is what it is. Random dungeon, next Rammus, and I think also one raid that is like above Nexus or Oculus. I don't remember. It's like a dragon, and you're like flying on a skateboards or some shit like that. But you are basically doing next from as the next phase. You are going to Ulduar, I think. Is it Ulduar? Yeah. Then it's going to be Trial of the Crusader, and then it's going to be Ice Crown. But you are progressing, and in that case, these random dungeons are actually quite difficult, if you ask me. Like, if you are having some newbies, then it's going to be a little bit difficult, because sometimes you need to pulley someone, you need to have a control. You cannot just pop Starfall anytime you want. So it is what it is. But if you're going to be having a fully progressed server, then yeah, you're having Ice Crown gear, so there's nothing that you can actually do. It's just really easy at that point. But yeah.
Controlling an army, you are one hero going through the city, helping Arthas purge it and eventually facing Mal'Ganis. I thought it was one of the coolest things ever. And here's an unpopular opinion that I'm just gonna throw out there. I loved Oculus. Yes, I know, Oculus. I know many people that hate this dungeon, and I just disagree. I thought it was really cool to have a balance between killing mobs yourself and having a drake you use to fly to different platforms and use that drake to defeat the last boss. I thought it was pretty damn sweet. Now there's many more dungeons I can talk about, and yes, not all were that great. I mean, the Violet Hold is one that takes place in just one big chamber, and half the time you're just sitting there scratching your ass while waiting for a few asses to spawn.
I hate Violet Hold so much. Imagine, I think the problem is that we are just overgeared. Like, I'm telling you, I'm tanking Ice Crown 25 heroics, and whenever I do like random dungeon and it's going to be popping Violet Hold, this dungeon is going to pop, I'm just face palming, and sometimes some of my teammates just leave right away. The problem is that I think it's also something to do that we are kind of like overgeared. So when the mobs spawn, we just kill them in like 5-10 seconds, and then we are waiting 25 seconds for the next mobs to spawn, and there is like 18 rounds, and you have like I think like 7th and maybe 12th and 16th round is a boss. But the bosses are actually kind of interesting, but I think the problem is that it just takes too much, and it's too long. And the Oculus, I actually like Oculus, but the problem is that the flying, you have to be picking up a dragon and flying from a platform to platform, like you mentioned. But I think the problem is that it's kind of like slowing it down. Like, you cannot just, I like to just like move, like keep it moving. Like, we are moving, clearing, AoEing all this stuff down. Like, we are murdering the shit. And that's what I like. And Oculus is kind of like slowing it down. Like, you will see later if Wrath of the Lich King servers are gonna come out. But it's definitely a really cool experience.
But I thought most of the dungeons were a pretty cool experience.
Yep.
Next up, we gotta mention glyphs briefly. Now, with the introduction of the new profession inscription, we also got a brand new system called glyphs. These could be added to your current spec to boost certain abilities depending on what you wanted and whether you were PvP or PvE oriented. They basically added another layer of character progression as you unlocked more slots the higher level you were. And some were pretty cool, like the Glyph of Thunderstorm, which increased the mana you get back, but it didn't knock back targets anymore. And while for
that glyph suck. Like, Elemental Shaman is all about a thunderstorm, you know what I'm saying? And now you're getting a glyph that gives you mana, bro. That hella sucks.
PvP, that's not exactly great.
Yep.
It was great for PvE, for instance, where you now got to do big amounts of AoE damage without knocking the trash mobs all over the place. Or the Glyph of Totem of Wrath, which gave you an extra buff after deploying your Totem of Wrath, granting you 30% of the totem's bonus spell power for 5 minutes. What about Glyph of Starfire, pushing back the Moonfire dot, allowing you to spend more time spamming Starfire rather than reapplying Moonfire more often, and the list just goes on and on. Basically, I like this extra layer of flexibility and character progression, and to me it was a welcome sight in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Alright, moving on to the Lich King.
What I think is a problem nowadays with Classic is that there is just too much potential. Let me elaborate. You have, for example, a warrior, and warrior, if he wants to be... Warrior is maybe a bad example, because you can be actually going kind of like there's a Fury prot spec, so you are going quite a lot into Fury, but you are picking the essentials from the defensive talent tree. And what it basically means is that you can be actually quite viable DPS, but at the same time you can be just switching to being a tank, and you can be off tanking quite a lot of maps. So that is actually quite flexible. But what I have a problem is that, let's say, there's just so much potential with like talent swapping, and you can be really like making your own identity, like what class you're gonna be playing. But I think the problem is that, let's say for example that you want to be a rested druid, but once in a while you want to be also speccing into like balance just for the fun, you know, for the meme, and you want to be also farming, let's say for example, but you are stuck in this resto gear, and I think that sucks a lot. And what you have to be doing is that you have to be respeccing all the time, and the respeccing is very costly, and so basically at the end of the day you're gonna be just farming the gold like 1 hour just so you can respect, and then 1 hour so you can respect back. Like, if you're gonna be respecting a lot, the final respec is going to cost, I think, like 50 golds or something like that, and that's actually really a lot, and I don't like it. I think there is a lot of potential lost, and yeah.
Yes, I know the main villain of this expansion was a bit...
In Wrath of the Lich King you have dual spec, and I love dual spec. It's so smart, and I definitely think that if it was in Classic it would make Classic a better experience. My opinion, maybe it's unpopular, but that's what it is.
Bit of a dead giveaway. So in terms of the surprise factor, there wasn't really any. But what I really liked was the build-up of the expansion. Yes, you knew that you would eventually fight the Lich King, but it was the road you had to travel before you could fight him that I thought was pretty epic. From appearances in dungeons, to fighting Kel'Thuzad and Naxxramas, to the trial of the Crusader. And I know some people really didn't like that raid, but I thought it was one of the coolest things ever. I mean, it makes sense that for such a huge and important task, they don't want to just send some random guys in there. They want to know that whoever wants to face the Lich King is worthy enough of doing so. Yep. And having a trial where you have to defeat some pretty epic bosses was a really cool idea in my opinion. And of course with that raid, the Lich King eventually shows up as well, destroys the floor, and you plummet down towards the depths where you have to fight Anub'arak. Of course, the multiple cinematics also really helped in building up the eventual fight, let alone the Lich King dungeons that were unlocked when Icecrown Citadel came out, where you infiltrated the Citadel, eventually finding Frostmourne and having to escape the Lich King.
This is Halls of Reflection, and you are actually running from Lich King, and he's chasing you, and Lady Jaina Proudmoore is actually helping you.
So that's what I liked about this expansion as well. Yes, you knew right from the get-go that sooner or later you'd fight Arthas, but the way it was built up was, in my opinion, really well done. And if we're going to talk about amazing raids, we have to mention Ulduar. This is a raid many consider to be one of the best raids Blizzard has ever made, and I definitely support that notion. It all starts with a giant offensive on the grounds to Ulduar, where you have to use vehicles to destroy buildings, towers, and hordes of troops, and you having to eventually fight a giant siege engine as a boss. Which was admittedly a very easy boss, but the idea was extremely cool. And well, the rest of the raid was equally awesome. For instance, I loved the idea of having to fight Kolagharn, and when you defeated him, his stone corpse became the bridge to the next set of bosses. And the room after Kolagharn is an absolute thing of beauty, let alone the train ride to Mimiron. And of course the grand finale that is a freaking old god. Yes, this boss fight definitely gave me some Cthulhu vibes, with phase 2 where he actually reveals himself.
What I want to add is that I also love, for example, that you had this all different areas in Old War. So you had, for example, this room was really nice, but right before that, there was like a room that you had like flying pieces of glass, like colored glass, and you had all these different types of. You had this colossus, you have these demons in this dungeon, and also, for example, there is like an antique god that was called Freya. Let me just show you, and she had like a huge garden right around her. Freya WOTLK. So this is so there was basically like a jungle inside of Uldur, and I've imagined exactly like this. You get a stars above you, and you are fighting the boss, and there's you're just in the jungle, and you're basically. It was giving me kind of like Zul'Gurub vibes, in my opinion. Zul'Gurub is really also a nice dungeon. So let's continue.
The tentacles you gotta destroy. It was probably one of my favorite boss fights ever. So yeah, Ulduar is awesome, and if I had to make a top 5 favorite raids, I'd say this would probably be in the top 3 without a doubt.
Yep.
Then I have to mention Wintergrasp. Now I'm actually a huge fan of Alterac Valley. Yes, I'm one of those guys that didn't farm Alterac Valley in Classic because it was the best way to farm honor. I actually joined.
The people that enjoy Alterac Valley are not the people who are ranking, because if you are ranking, you're going to be hating that raid. But if you are, for example, ninjaing and not ninjaing, what is it called? Turtling, where you are when you are just like a massive turtle, like Shadow Priest, Night Elf Shadow Priest, or a rogue, then you're going to love Alterac Valley because you can be trolling a lot. But if you are trying to rank, then it can be kind of frustrating, and you're gonna be hating Alterac Valley.
Those battlegrounds because I love the idea of a raid versus a raid in a huge zone with towers, mini bosses, and a ton of other things. Of course, old school Alterac Valley, way back in retail vanilla, was where these battles felt the most authentic, so to say, but I digress. Wintergrasp definitely gave me some old school Alterac Valley vibes, with the addition of vehicles, which I thought was really cool. I mean, it's always very demotivating to join battlegrounds when you barely have any PvP gear yet, and these vehicles made sure that you could actually do a good job and really support your raid, regardless of your gear level.
If you didn't have a gear, just pick up a machine, and you're going to be actually more valuable than most of the people who are having like this gear in the team, because without the machines you are not having any chance.
And these huge assaults on a fortress, or defending the fortress from attacks depending on who controlled the fortress at that time, was always a joy to experience. Not to mention the extra incentive of a bonus raid that you can do when your faction controls the fortress, which is a quick and easy way of getting some bonus gear. Sure, the chance of very useful upgrades was small, but it was a quick and fun raid that gave you an extra opportunity to snag some extra gear once per week. So yeah, Wintergrasp in my humble opinion was awesome, so I just had to mention it here.
Just to elaborate, Vault of Arcavon, the dungeon that he was showing, is very, very important if you want to be doing PvP. Let me elaborate. There is Wintergrasp battle every 3 hours, and if your faction is gonna be winning the Wintergrasp, you can be actually going into this raid, and your whole global chat is gonna be just spam VOA, VOA 10, VOA 25. And what is actually really nice is that you are dropping also PvE pieces, but also PvP pieces, and also the main set and also offset. So you can be dropping, it can be dropping like feet, wrists, legs, hand. But also at the same time, what I like is that in VOA 10 you can be actually doing a class run. So basically what it means that you can have one of each class, and you can be going you can be actually going through the dungeon, and if for example a shaman piece is going to be dropping, then it's 100% sure that you're gonna be getting it because you're the only shaman.
And well, last but not least, we gotta talk about dual talent specialization. I know this got brought up in the discussion of quality of life changes in Classic, and for a good reason. A lot of people really like this feature in WoW. I mean, even in today's WoW, you still have that system in place, but instead of it being dual, you're able to change into whatever spec you want on the spot, rather than switching between just two. But the idea is still kind of the same. And well, in Wrath of the Lich King, it definitely made more sense. Dungeoneering became a lot quicker and more streamlined, and being able to switch in and out of a certain spec meant that you could queue up as multiple roles, depending on your class of course, which ultimately meant that for a lot of classes you'd be able to get into a dungeon a lot quicker. It was also super convenient in times where someone who was a healer, for instance, left your dungeon group and one of the damage dealers says, "Hey, no worries, I got an off healing spec." He could then switch to that spec and you guys would be able to finish the dungeon. And well, having played an elemental shaman and a boomkin on Wrath of the Lich King private servers, I can tell you that being able to swap between my damage and healing spec was a surefire way to get into dungeons quicker, and also gave me some bonus points when it came to joining a raid where you can tell the leader you can fulfill multiple roles. So yeah, I love this feature and it really fit the quicker pace of
Exactly. I'm trying to, let's say I'm going Ice Crown Citadel 25 and I will just tell to the leader, I can see that in the guild they are assembling the raid, and I will just say, bro, I'm the main tank, I'm either a tank, Protadin, that is actually very viable in Ice Crown. Some say it's the best off tank, or I can be a Retribution Paladin, and Retribution Paladin is really good as well because you are providing the buffs for your raid. You are providing Hand of Sacrifice, that is very important defensive skill. If for example the tank is gonna be taking a lot of damage throughout, let's say for example Lich King, you need just a Hand of Sacrifices in certain. It's the same like pain suppression from the Disco Priest. So very viable spec, and yeah.
Of dungeoneering and raiding that the Wrath of the Lich King expansion had. And well, there you go guys, a bunch of features that I definitely liked in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Now while there are definitely a bunch of things I like, I realize no expansion is perfect, and there are also some things I didn't like, so who knows, I might make a video about that too in the near future. For now though, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Hamster Wheel and have a good one.
A really good video. I'm leaving a like. What I like about Wrath of the Lich King, as I said, is that the PvP is much faster. PvE is really good and it has a story, like you really can feel that you are getting through it. Like all the dungeons, I love the aesthetic of the dungeons, I love the aesthetic of the raids. As I'm saying, Ulduar is an amazing dungeon. I just love the area where Freya is, stars above your head, you are in the jungle, then at the same time you're going into some like ice tunnel, then afterwards you are going to like some futuristic I don't know what is this hall with the machines and stuff like that. It's really cool and I really like it. Yeah, Hamster Wheel, a really good video. I left you a like. Fellas, write me in the comments what video I'm supposed to check out in the next one. Thank you for watching, leave a like, support me, and see you in the next one. Bye.